take a look at this image here that we do have coming in from. This is actually courtesy the IDF here, as 3 Israeli soldiers have been killed by a blast in a booby-trapped building amid the operation in Gaza's southernmost city of Rafah. The photos of the soldiers that you see there provided by the Israel Defense Forces, courtesy the Times of Israel. The IDF is reporting that 291 Israeli troops have been killed in the fight against Hamas in Gaza. Do want to bring in Raphael Cohen, the director of the Strategy and Doctrine Program of RAND Project Air Force, joining us now to discuss all of this here. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and break down the latest out of the Middle East.
Thank you so much for having me on, Josh.
Of course. Well, first off, I do want to talk about the discovery there, the IDF saying that this was a booby-trap blast. I did want to get kind of your take on that, because it does show how dangerous the situation is for the troops that are there on the ground in Rafah, because they don't know what they are going to come up against.
Yes, no, I mean, so this does highlight the danger posed to all the IDF soldiers moving into Rafah. In and of itself, the tactic shouldn't come as a surprise. It's, the idea of booby-trapping houses is a tactic that we've seen employed by the Islamic State, by a variety of Iraqi militants in Iraq, Afghan militants in Afghanistan. So this tactic is in and of itself not surprising, but it does highlight sort of the danger of the situation. And as you mentioned before, 291 Israeli soldiers have been killed in actions in Gaza, which, particularly on a per capita basis, makes this one of the bloodiest wars that Israel has fought in its history.
And we do know, talking a little bit more about that Gaza aid pier that was built by the U.S., there's been a lot of talk about that really over the past, I would say, month or so. But we do know yesterday that operations have been suspended pretty much indefinitely after that pier was essentially I don't want to say ripped apart. Pieces of it did kind of wash away as a result of the rough seas. I want to get your take on that, because does that lead to any concerns about the effectiveness of that pier?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, parts of this pier have been ripped away. They've been moved into Israel, actually, for repairs, and hopefully will be back and operational. I think what we should take away from this incident, though, is sort of 2 big picture takeaways, if you will. First off, I think this incident sort of confirms what you've heard coming out of many humanitarian organizations, as well as military strategists, that the pier in and of itself is not a silver bullet for getting aid into Gaza. It's a complex logistical operation, and in and of itself, that doesn't replace moving trucks in over land. I think the second point here, though, sort of stepping back for a moment, is I think it highlights just how complex solving the humanitarian angle in Gaza is. I mean, I think there's a sort of media narrative out there that, if only we had the pier, or only we had X number of trucks going into Gaza, everything would be okay. That's just not the case. This is a very complex operation. There's engineering challenges out of the pier, but there's also distribution challenges and making sure that the aid actually gets to the right people in Gaza and not into the hands of Hamas. And all of those need to be tackled, and there's unfortunately, no silver bullet here.
And talking a little bit more about the Rafah strike that happened over on Sunday, there's been a lot of discussion. The IDF did do an initial investigation and essentially said that it was a secondary explosion that led to the deaths of many Palestinian civilians that were nearby. My question for you, it does sound as though the IDF is saying that there may have been a Hamas, I guess, weapons storage location that was there. What do we know about that, and what is the significance if that is the case?
So as you mentioned, the Israelis conducted a strike over the weekend. They were going after Yassin Rabia, who is a senior Hamas militant. He's in charge of all of Hamas militant operations in the West Bank, so very much a legitimate target, along with one of his senior lieutenants. From what we've heard from media reports, is the Israelis used a small explosive, a small diameter bomb. It's an American-supplied weapon. It's deliberately designed to try to minimize casualties. And then the Israelis claim from there that when they conducted that strike, it ignited a ammunition dump nearby. As the Israelis released photos of a rocket launcher that wasn't that far away from this. And they have also released some SIGINT intercepts, some intelligence intercepts of 2 Gazan militants saying that this blew up a ammunition depot in addition, and that's what caused the blaze that ultimately led to civilian casualties. Now, if that is indeed the case, I think you could argue that the Israelis are basically following the Biden administration's guidance to minimize civilian casualties. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with militants that sort of embed themselves in the local population, there's significant civilian fallout. In which case, I don't think it's going to matter much to the U.S.-Israeli relationship. That's not going to quell the sort of upswell of support internationally or outrage internationally. But factually, I think that would be what's actually happening on the ground.
The United Nations Security Council did have an emergency meeting yesterday regarding that Rafah strike. We know it was requested by Algeria, I believe. And my question for you is, what is the significance of a meeting like that, especially considering it was closed door? We know normally these are open. You have cameras that are inside the meeting room so folks at home can watch all of it play out. But this was a closed door meeting. What is the significance of really all of that?
Yeah, so from what we hear from media accounts, Algeria is pushing for a UN declaration to immediately end the Israeli operations in Rafah. Whether or not they make it through the Security Council, I think depends largely on the U.S. veto. There is significant support for that resolution among some members of the Security Council, Russia, China, but also some of the European members as well. So it ultimately depends on whether or not the U.S. decides to veto that resolution. Now, the reason why this session was held behind closed doors, my guess is that was to try to encourage a little bit more frank dialogue between the members of the Security Council. There's an element of theater to all UN Security Council sessions, particularly ones that play out in public, where the members are talking not only to each other, but also to their publics back home. So I think the argument for trying to move this behind closed doors was to have a sort of more frank and honest discussion.
When we talk about a potential truce, a ceasefire deal that would lead to the release of the remaining hostages that are still being held in Gaza, we're talking more than 100 hostages taken more than 7 months ago. What would need to happen for a deal to actually be reached between Israel and Hamas? Because we've seen delegations go and meet countless times over the past several months, and nothing has really happened. It appears to be kind of at a standstill. So what, in your opinion, would need to happen for a deal to be reached?
Yeah, so there are a couple of major sticking points here. First, there's a question of how many of the hostages are still in Hamas's custody. Hamas says that they are not in control of the full 128 missing Israelis. They say that, originally the idea was for the first tranche of released hostages would be 40. They said, well, we don't have that number, so the Israelis reduced the number down to 33. Supposedly Hamas has said, well, we don't really have 33 anymore, or only 33 live hostages. So maybe we can give you back some of deceased hostages as well. But that's where some of the sticking point is. Now, in addition to all of that, the other major sticking point is who Hamas wants to be released in return. The Israelis, I think, have accepted the fact that they will release some number of security detainees. But the question is who among the prisoners that they're currently holding on to will they be willing to trade? And that's significant because many of those Hamas militants have Israeli blood on their hands. They're convicted of serious crimes, including murder. And the Israelis don't want to release those individuals for fear that they will spark more violence in the future.
Want to also talk about what's going on in the north, because we talk so much about the Israel-Hamas war, what's taking place in Gaza, but as you head to the north, you also have the situation between Israel and Lebanon's Hezbollah. So my question for you, does it seem like that situation is continuing to intensify, and could it possibly die down anytime soon?
So I think it's hard to imagine this dying down absent some sort of truce in Gaza itself. If you look over the last several weeks, there's been intensifying drone strikes and then Israeli strikes into southern Lebanon. Hezbollah has responded by shelling at the northern parts of Israel. neither side at some level really wants a war there. Hezbollah has made it very clear that they would rather not have southern Lebanon look like what Gaza looks like currently. Conversely, the Israelis also are keenly aware that they do not want to have Hezbollah's fairly massive arsenal of rockets landing on a good chunk of Israel, which will likely overwhelm Israeli air defenses. So there's an element of deterrence there, but at the same time, neither side really is keen to back down, partly because they're worried about the long game and wanting to mutually deter each other, not now, but into the future, and therefore they don't want to back down and therefore look weak.
Right. Thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to join us and break down the latest developments there out of the Middle East. Anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
No, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Josh. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to talk to you as well.